morning. Oh, there we go. Hi, everyone. This is weird that it's over here, so. Right. Good morning, and welcome. Thank you for joining us. Hope everybody's getting over whatever ailment has stricken everyone these days. So I'm Nicole Hankton. I'm the Director of Marketing and Sales for Visit Walnut Creek. For those of you that don't know, Walnut Creek is in Northern California. We're 25 miles east of San Francisco. We're about 40 to 45 minutes from beautiful Napa wine country, and we're also close to Livermore Valley wine country, so we're nestled in a beautiful part of the Bay Area. We're a proud sponsor of this important education session on developing comprehensive DEI strategy that is integrated into your association's infrastructure. I'm supposed to go about Walnut Creek right now, but I already did that. So with that, let's get started with our session. Our moderator for today's session is lovely Tiffany Martin, owner and CEO of TK Martin Consulting. She is passionate about helping organizations understand the importance of cultivating an internal business culture where diversity, equity, and inclusion are inherent to everyday business operations. She believes that the key to promoting authentic DEI practices is to recognize the value and diversity and to acknowledge that although everyone's life experiences are different, their perspectives are valid. Makes sense to me? She's joined by a fabulous panel, and you all have to raise your hands because we didn't have a chance to get acquainted. So, Christina Locke, Director of Marketing and Membership Services. Christina, you and I have met. Jennifer, please tell me how to pronounce your name. Lupke, Chief Workforce Inclusion Officer with Pride Industries. And Kirsten Maki, you're on my table later. Yeah. Founder of Association Management Solutions. Our panelists will share more about themselves during the session. Please join me in giving this powerhouse lineup of speakers a very warm welcome.
Hi, how's everyone doing? If you're in the back, feel free to move forward because I know we're kind of a little lower viewing from here with the ladies and the panelists, so feel free to move forward, take up space in any of these seats. I'm more than happy to move my stuff out of it.
Making sure. Okay, excellent. Before we begin, I just wanted to pose 2 questions to you that I'd like you to think about as we have our panel today. The first question is, what does it mean to be diverse as an organization? What does that look like? What does that feel like? And the second question is, what is the value of being diverse as an organization? All right? I want you to keep those things in mind as we talk today, because the ladies here today are going to share their insight and experiences that'll hopefully lend to how you perceive and respond to those questions. So first and foremost, before we get started with questions, I'd like each of the ladies to just go down and just briefly mention what their organizations manage and handle in the area of diversity in which they're kind of focused in bolstering and working with.
Thank you, Tiffany. I'm Chris Locke. I work for SAMPE. We're an engineering society. We focus on education of aerospace and composites engineering specialists. And so we have a DEI committee that as a staff person, I kind of help lead and get a lot done, and I'll talk more about that as we go through the process.
Hi, I'm Kirsten Maki. I'm one of the founders of Association Management Solutions. We're a full-service AMC. We also do meeting and event planning, and we also have a technology division where we have an AMS system. So we manage several associations, both regional associations and international organizations, and so I, along with my staff, recommend and advise boards of directors and committees of our associations on ways that they can incorporate diversity and equity and inclusion in their groups, and we try to support and help facilitate that.
Hi everyone, I'm Jennifer Liebke. I'm the Chief Workforce Inclusion Officer for Pride Industries, and Pride Industries' mission is to create employment for people with disabilities. And so our area of expertise is really in the disability inclusion area, in the environment of employment. And we help people with disabilities obtain skills, find employment, and we also help employers become more inclusive of people with disabilities. But we also internally have employee resource groups where we gather people that have various, have various interests and have different lived experiences. So veterans, people with disabilities, we have a Black employer network, etc. So we do a lot right now in the diversity area.
So one more thing, I'm gonna use the acronym DEIB. Anyone know what that B stands for? Go ahead. Belonging, that's right. So they are different. Diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging all have a special place in the whole circle, as I'd say, of having more inclusive practices. And so I just want to make sure when I say that, you guys understand that the B is the belonging for that. So with that, we're gonna kick it off with some questions. This first question is gonna be for Christine and Kirsten. What is one of the biggest challenges you've faced with respect to either your organization or a partner organization, including or incorporating DEIB into their organizational practices?
So this is a great question for my group because I work with engineers and I'm married to one as well, so I cannot get away from them. It's a wonderful group of demographics that I deal with daily, and the one thing that sets them apart is that engineers see the world in black and white. And what we're talking about here today, DEIB, is not so black and white, is it? It's a very gray area. It's a soft skill, and that is very uncomfortable for my demographic. They find it important. They know they need to know about DEIB and implement the practices, but they aren't quite sure how to do that. And so that's where me as a non-engineer with those soft skills comes into play. So what we do is we created a working group to develop a DEI statement that we put on our website and in our marketing material and in our job descriptions to kind of help just get that conversation started. And it really was talking about 3 key elements, who we are and what we do. And we basically talk about how we are inclusive, we celebrate diversity, talents, and welcome all without regard to gender, sexual orientation, race, ethnic and cultural backgrounds, etc. We celebrate diversity, we take it and embrace it. The second one is we invite members and prospective members to work together. And we see that in all of the committees and volunteer leadership and how they embrace it, so that's nice. And then the third is just that active participation. So we actually have in our DEI statement a call to action. If you want to be part of the change that you think is needed, join our DEI committee and help us make the changes. And so we regularly have people who do join our committee who come at it from a very personal place. We're talking about engineers who I've got women, I've got people of color on my committee, but I also have white men, one of them who is the father of a woman who is also an aerospace engineer and has high empathy for what she's going through. So he wanted to be part of the change. So to me, that's a beautiful thing.
So I have a different perspective. Like I mentioned before, we're an AMC, so we have several association clients. I would say one of our biggest challenges as an AMC is, we can advise our prospective clients and work with board members and people in leadership within those associations. But at the end of the day, it's really up to them to decide to incorporate DEI. So although as a company, we support it, and I would say practice it, although we don't have a DEI policy, we just live it every day. Our clients, it's up to them to decide whether or not to proceed with something, whether it's a program or a policy or whatever it happens to be. So it's like, you can lead the horse to water, but you can't make him drink. So sometimes that's frustrating, but that's probably our biggest challenge.
You can make them thirsty though.
Yes.
No, I really like that, Kirsten, you saying that there's not a specific policy, and I know that sounds totally unintuitive to the whole goal and the mission, but ideally you want it to be, just like you said, a part of how you do business, of how you represent yourselves and how you engage with your membership, your communities, and your stakeholders. And so I think just starting with a policy, I think is definitely good. And like you said, being able to influence is one thing, but being able to enforce is another, right? It is as we start to go down this journey. So thank you, ladies. The second question is going to be from Ms. Jennifer, and then Christine, I'd also like to hear you speak to it. As we deal with diversity in different forms, because diversity is diverse, there's no one definition for it. So as we do that, what are some of the unrealized benefits of incorporating diversity as it relates to the specific communities that you engage with and that you support, and as well as not just how they incorporate it, but also reflect that in hiring practices?
Yeah, thanks so much for the question. This is a message that I preach every day, but our society, we have about 26% of our folks in the United States that have a disability, 26%. So the world, as we know it, was not built for people with disabilities. And for companies who say, well, we don't really have people with disabilities at our company, that's actually not true. Most people don't want to disclose. If there's a non-apparent disability, they don't disclose it because there's a fear of that stigma and bias that they may be looked upon as less than or not as competent as people who seem to be non-disabled. But in disability diversity, when we talk about people with disabilities, I'm just going to address that real quickly. There's such a variety, right? I always tell folks, like at my company, saying people with disabilities is like saying Asians, right? The Indian culture is extremely different from the Japanese culture, which is different from the Filipino culture, but they're in this big group. So people with disabilities, you've got people who were born with the disability, people who acquired it later in life, which is where most people, the larger percentage of people are, and then people who have a temporary disability. We always forget that all of us can become disabled at any point in time, if we're not currently disabled. And then there's differences like cognitive disabilities, physical disabilities, people with mental health diagnosis, the list goes on. So in each of those communities, they're very different. So as far as hiring practices and the benefits of hiring from this very diverse community of the 26%, in general, people with disabilities stay at their jobs longer. They are more loyal just overall to their companies because when they have a job and a role, it's so difficult for them to get that role that they tend to want to stay in that role for a longer period of time. That could be good for many companies who are looking for stability. Also, when people see that you're hiring people who are diverse, people with autism, people with intellectual disabilities, people in wheelchairs, they tend to think that the company, whether this is true or not, but I think mostly it's true, that people really care about people who are different and people who are normally othered. So I think there are financial benefits, there are morale benefits to hiring people with disabilities. And I think if we can just open up our minds a little bit to looking intentionally at people who are different in that way, and really changing our environments, whether it's a membership environment, an employer, we will really see how amazing diversity plays out, especially in the disability area, which is where I focus.
So the question was about unrealized benefits, and I'm going to tell a personal anecdote about that because I'm a veteran and I was in the Air Force and I was in a combat position before women were allowed in combat. I'm that old. And so when I interviewed to be to come to March Air Reserve Base, I was told, well, you know, you'd be the only female in a combat squadron who's not admin or, you know, flying a desk as they call it. They wanted me to train. And so I was there and doing the training as the only woman on that flight line, pushing 10,000-pound pallets onto C-141s, C-17s now, C-130s and so forth. And I had an Army infantry unit that was going onto the plane as well, and they were bored. They were sitting on that flight line waiting to get onto that plane to go to Iraq, and they just were bored out of their mind. They're watching me and some of my peers and laughing because I'm a woman. I'm the only one out there. It's all guys, and they're all pushing these 10,000-pound pallets by themselves. How's this chick gonna do that? So I had a friend of mine heard one of the Army guys say, if that bee can push that pallet onto that plane by herself, I'm gonna cut a certain part of his anatomy off. So my friend told me about it, I said, that's fine. So I went and I pushed that pallet onto that plane by myself, and he quietly sat there and watched me do it. And later, after he and his first sergeant came to me and apologized and lost a stripe and had to go back to his peers, you know, I just realized that that's the benefit of being somebody who's different on that flight line. I was paving the way for other women when they were allowed to be in combat, to be in that squadron, to do what they did. Now, part of the benefit of being a female in that unit and doing that, what I did was also, I was looking at troops that were going there, and some of them were not coming back alive. I was looking them in the eye, and I was making sure that they had as much comfort and just that human touch as possible before they got on that plane and went to a place God only knows what they were going to experience. The other guys in my squadron weren't thinking about that. They were just thinking about stuffing them onto that plane, getting onto the next plane, moving on. And I just had everyone pause for a minute and just think about what we're doing here. This is the first time that we had to do this as a country, and our squadron was one of the first to get those people out there. And it made a difference to just make eye contact, just touch their shoulder, just, you know, wish them well. And, you know, I had a lot of very grown, very big, burly men just say thank you. And that's that touch, that benefit.
No, thank you for sharing that story. I love hearing that because I think, quite honestly and simply, we make assumptions, right? We live with these inherent and implicit biases of what we think people are capable of doing. And it's based on all kinds of things. I make assumptions about what my 9-year-old can and can't do. And then she does something and I'm totally flabbergasted, and then I have to put myself in check as a parent to say, why would I assume she couldn't? Why wouldn't I just give her the opportunity to perform, help her if she needs it, or let her thrive if she's got it? And we often don't consider that. So basically that unrealized benefit is we don't know what we don't know. We don't know how we've operated in a structure that we're used to, how inviting differences in changes our perspective and even the scope of what we can do, because different people from different backgrounds have different appeals to different audiences. That's what makes the culture so great. So thank you, ladies, for sharing those experiences with your organizations and with yourselves. This next question is going to be for Kirsten and Jennifer. I would like you to share your thoughts on leadership, because leadership is a key piece to how DEIB is incorporated into an organization and how it's valued. So I'd like you to share your experiences, whether it's a positive or a negative, on how you've seen the impact leadership has on the success of these initiatives.
Thank you for that question. As I mentioned before, we're an AMC, so we manage several associations. And I will say that our experience has been that leadership is key, and you need a champion, somebody that can really make something happen. It's not about writing a policy or having a practice in place. It's about actually doing something to make the change. So from our perspective, our clients, our associations that we manage that actually have really great programs in place are the ones that have had a champion within the organization that has pushed the change through. And it's really important not only to have a champion, but also for the organization as a whole, at least from a leadership or board of director perspective, is to actually practice whatever that change is. So, otherwise, the members of your organization or your attendees are going to look at leadership and really not believe them, that what the change that they're trying to implement is really something that they want to see, happen. It's, anyway, so, and then, let's see, I'm just looking at some of my notes. So the organization needs to embody the beliefs that they're about the change that they're trying to make. We try to influence that, as I said, but sometimes, we aren't able to. But we do have a few clients that have implemented some really great programs. And we'll have a QR code at the end here that has a lot of resource material, and there's some examples of some of the programs that some of our clients have put into place.
Thanks. I'm going to tell a personal story, and then I'm going to also talk about my experience in being hired at Pride Industries. I've been at Pride now for a little bit over a year, and prior to Pride, I'd had a corporate background in corporate accounting. I was in higher education. I was an associate dean for a Division II business school, and I had a variety of experiences, but I really wanted to go into an area where I could use my passion for people with disabilities. I have an adult son. He's 24 years old, and he has an intellectual disability. And by the way, he lives in Atlanta. People with intellectual disabilities aren't supposed to live away from their parents, right? They're supposed to be living at home or living close by. He lives in Atlanta. He goes to Georgia Tech, and there's a program there specifically for people with intellectual disabilities. So I've been leaning towards wanting to have sort of the last stage of my career be in a nonprofit organization or a social enterprise where I could use that passion and all my business and higher ed skills to do some really great work that's meaningful to me. And I had applied and actually been recruited for some very large organizations that do this, where I could really use my talents in that area. And I have to say that a lot of these organizations on the onset didn't seem very diverse, at least from a visible standpoint. And I had always been kind of the runner-up, that second, the person who got hired was not someone who looked like me, and I did not get hired. So after about 3 times going through these processes, I said, you know what, forget it. I'm just gonna go do some consulting work, because this is too hard. I'm going to volunteer and be on advisory boards for disability nonprofits, and I'll just make money and pay my bills here and just donate money, and that's how I'm going to live my life. Then the recruiter for Pride Industries called. Had never heard of them. I lived in the Bay Area. And they said, we think you'd be perfect for this role as a Chief Workforce Inclusion Officer. I looked on the website, I looked it up, and I was like, I don't think so, because it wasn't diverse. And they called me, they had to call me at least a few times to say, no, there's intentionality from the CEO that we're going to make a more diverse environment. And I looked at the CEO's picture, and I was like, I don't think so. So I did finally interview and was enamored with the mission and the key people. There was a senior director of diversity, equity, and inclusion. She's Black. She talked to me about her reason for going, because I looked at her and I'm like, why did you come here? Because I want to know about you. Talked to the CEO. Once I had my interview with him, I knew he was different. I had talked about DEIB with other CEOs and other C-level people. He was different, and he was very intentional. He said, we want to make this place, we're already doing it for people with disabilities, and now we need to expand that to other areas of difference. That leadership that he provided and the vision helped turn me, because I've never lived anywhere except for the Bay Area, and I had to move up here for this job. My husband, is a teacher, inclusion teacher, special ed, had to move, and he didn't want to leave the kids that he taught. So that leadership is super important. And I have to say, when I went there, there have been people that have been hired since, and the CEO has remained true. I'm on the executive team. We just hired a CFO who happens to be a Black man. He has a son with autism. I'm also a parent of someone with a disability, and they've also added a man who's Hispanic, who's a wheelchair user, on our board. So having additional people that visibly have differences, and you know what, there are probably people on the executive team and the board that have non-apparent differences also, but it's really important for people like me and others to be able to see it as well. So the leadership really makes a huge impact in this area.
Hello? Oh, excellent. Thank you, ladies. Thank you for sharing. And you're so right. There are so many differences that we don't see, that we don't inherently digest or understand when we meet people. So being able to step out in that boldness and be explicit about what you want to bring into an organization is very important, especially as a leader, because you set the tone. You set the tone for how your staff are going to engage with stakeholders, the members they support, and so I think that's extremely important. Our next question, I'd like all three panelists to kind of give me a top idea around this. What would be one piece of advice or guidance you could give to organizational leadership around creating more inclusive and equitable standard operating procedures? Like, what's something you'd tell them to help them implement? I don't like to say best practices, because practices vary based on the organization and its makeup. What works for my organization may not work for your organization. So I'll just say how to get started, or where to look to making change to be more equitable and inclusive.
Thank you, great question. So there's a couple, I have about 3 ideas about that. The first one, of course, is CalSAE is a great resource, and use them. There's always some new tools in the toolkit that they have that's available, and you don't need to reinvent the wheel on this. There's some really great stuff out there. You're welcome on my contact information on the QR code to just go to my URL and see what my statement is. Feel free to just use it and make it your own. It's there for the taking. But my biggest piece of advice is really to customize your approach. I mean, to me and to the organization, DEIB is always evolving. We started off as just a quick task force, put the statement together and be on our way. Now we're a committee, and our committee meets monthly, and we have people, like I said before, that are coming in all the time from our various events to be engaged. But also, we just this last year created a DEI award for our membership, and that was a fantastic way to get our membership to be thinking more about DEIB. And so now we're evolving the award program, because I've got people who are submitting for Boeing and Airbus and those sorts of organizations, and government entities, NASA and so forth. Well, we all know that they already have a very strong DEIB program, so they're a very strong contender for these awards. We are now looking at how do you get the mom and pop businesses to also be thinking about DEIB, and how can they get that award too. So the team is just thinking about what that means. What is DEIB yesterday? What is it going to be today and then tomorrow? And it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. And so our committee is always kind of just thinking about how do we get more different, diverse people engaged. And as we talked about with the benefits, it's hugely beneficial, and just they are excited to have a platform to be able to talk about it now.
I love that you said, Chris, that it started as just a throw together task force, because I think that is one thing that I wanted to address is when you're looking at DEIB programs, I think you just start simple. Start with one thing. Start with something that is important to your organization. We have a client that is a fairly large international association. The attendees and the members are primarily, not to completely stereotype, but older, white men, engineers. So, so with that organization, right, they want to incorporate and become more diverse. So they intentionally started by just asking the members, like, what should we be doing to diversify our attendees and members? How can we do that? And so they actually pulled together a Miro board, which is like a virtual Post-it note page. And so people were able to submit ideas anonymously. And then leadership took that information afterwards and sort of prioritized it in a grid, high impact, low effort, so on and so forth. And so then they were able to prioritize those programs, and it's simple stuff, it's like, they want to reach out to millennials, so how are they gonna do that? And part of that is, communicating with them in a different way, in a different format. Just Caroline, our keynote, talked about that, right? With Visit California, they do 60-second, 30-second, 15-second, so on and so forth ads, but then those are also done in, versions in print, on social media, and they change it to the format in which they want the information or how they want the target audience to receive it. So anyway, I would say start small, pick one thing, ask your membership, and be intentional about it. And then you can grow it from there. I'm just gonna look at my notes. Yeah, so solicit input, don't dictate. That was some discussion that we had internally is, don't just say what you're gonna do, but solicit feedback because you want buy-in, not only from your members, but from your leadership folks as well. I think that's it for me.
Thanks. I think it's really important to demonstrate, as a leader, what inclusiveness and belonging looks like or could look like. So some of the things that we do, my administrative assistant is deaf, and I've learned so much from him because he doesn't consider himself disabled. He actually says to me, you don't know American Sign Language, so you're actually like not bilingual, right? So we joke around a lot, quite a bit, but I'm actually really bummed because I really wanted to have a sign language interpreter for this. Unfortunately, the company that we use didn't have anyone available, but even if there may not be anybody here who's deaf, having a sign language interpreter here would have, I think, been a great representation of what Pride Industries does. And in all of our virtual meetings where I have my entire team, I've got about over 300 people on my team. We have an all-team meeting once a month. We always include a sign language interpreter, even though there is one person that is deaf. And the goal there is to make sure that, we encourage that if anybody has a friend who's deaf, to refer them as an employee to Pride Industries. Another thing is that I use my pronouns, right? So I have on my Teams call, Jennifer Lutke, she, her, hers. Whenever I start with, and I didn't start here, I should have, but whenever I do that, I always use my pronouns. And that's to make people who use pronouns or who are othered to feel like they can also say that. It's about welcoming and making that environment feel inclusive for many different people. So those are a few things that I would say are also pieces of advice. The other thing that I tell companies, especially if they don't have a particular ERG for people with disabilities, or they want to hire more people of that 26% that's untapped, make the environment comfortable, have some disability awareness, lunch and learns, make it comfortable for people to self-disclose, and ask them how you can provide accommodations or supports for that person. And instead of asking each person maybe as they come, enter the company and disclose, find out what all the accommodation requests are and make that just part of what you do. So if you get a lot of accommodation requests for, I don't know, I'm just trying to think through larger print because maybe there are people with vision impairment. Make everything that you have 14 font or larger. Actually, I have reading glasses and I can't see anything, and that would really help me too. So I don't have to put on my glasses.
Yeah.
Oftentimes accommodations that you make for all, larger screens on computers, most of the time that actually benefits everybody. So those are some things that can be done that are not as expensive. In fact, the average cost of an accommodation for someone with a disability is $500. Average cost. There are going to be some that need special equipment, but others that just need, I've got a person on my team who has dialysis twice a week. We all know as a team, we just don't schedule meetings, during the regular times that she has dialysis. We make that accommodation. It's easy, it's simple. So those are the things that I would suggest. Start with the easy, simple things, and then maybe, when people see that there's more of an open environment to be safe, to feel safe, I can disclose. I can talk to people about who I authentically am. More and more people will sort of self-disclose, they'll feel comfortable. And then we can figure out what are the accommodations needed for everyone, whether it's a disability, whether it's something else. But I think that's a good place to start.
Thank you, ladies. I heard a lot of good things in there. I heard mindfulness, intention, reflecting the standard that you want your organization to reflect or engage in. And one of the things I like to speak to, and I heard about it with environment, I call it a shark environment, SHARC, which is, when we talk about belonging in DEIB, you want to create a space, an environment, or a culture in which people feel safe, heard, acknowledged, respected, and comfortable. Because when you have those simple elements, and quite frankly, it shouldn't even be about DEIB, right? When I go to work, I expect all of those to be in play for me to work in a job. That's just an inherent expectation. So a lot of it comes down to just being a good organization, investing in your staff, in your stakeholders, in your membership. And by meeting those thresholds, you will inherently and ideally incorporate DEIB. So that's great. Ladies, I want to leave some time for some questions from our audience here. So I'm going to come back to our final question. So at this time, I want to open it up to you, either to share an experience or if you have specific questions on how you can approach it or challenges with your organization. I'd like to be able to have myself and the panelists be able to respond to you. So please go ahead and raise your hand if you have a question and I'll come around to you. Yes?
Thanks. I have a million questions, but I'll only ask one. I'll talk to you all after. So this question is for all of you, but I feel like, Jennifer, you might be able to provide some more specific strategies. As you mentioned, we often have staff members who have disabilities that we don't know about, and I'm annoyingly observant and try to be an empath as much as I can, and I've picked up on a few of my staff members with things that I've noticed, but obviously cannot ask or, try and get information about it, and it's up to them to share if they want to. But so what do you do if you recognize this, but you can't necessarily ask? And obviously I'm documenting things and kind of seeing what I see and trying to find resources and inadvertently implement it into like their reviews, things like that, without it being very obvious and blatant. But I guess how do you approach that is my question. And I don't want to, again, with assumptions, I don't want to assume that's what it is, and I'm just reading into something more than what it is, but it kind of, to me, it seems like there's something there, but I can't really ask or are. And I want to help, and provide those resources, but I guess, how do I approach that?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I can talk a little bit about some of the things that I've done when I've noticed certain things. Like one person, I did notice that they had a lot of abstract thoughts, and I was frustrated because I'm such a, okay, we've got an agenda item, and we need to talk about A, B, C, and D. And they kept veering, right? So they needed more time, and our one-on-one was usually like Tuesday at 8 o'clock for 45 minutes, and that wasn't enough time for them to get all their ideas out. So one of the things I thought through was, maybe it's clearly they're neurodivergent and maybe have a different way of thinking. So I scheduled our one-on-ones towards the afternoon where, I've got like an open-ended, I don't have small kids at home. And this person can go on for a long time, but what I did was I made it towards the end of the day so that person would feel like they had more time to get their ideas across. And at the same time, from a business perspective, I was like, okay, maybe what you could do is find a thought partner to kind of get all these ideas out, because sometimes I won't be able to have all the time in the world, and we're gonna have to get it done in 45 minutes. So I try to balance that out a little bit to make that person feel more comfortable. This person's never told me that they, may be neurodivergent, right? Another person that I know, I was suspecting that they may have dyslexia because the numbers are dyscalculia. Because whenever we were working with numbers, they would, say 500 for 5,000 or think different things. And so I encouraged that person. I said, I see that sometimes we're getting the numbers incorrect. We've really got to be precise. Maybe you could work with someone who could help you with that. And then I would also say though, hey, I noticed that you're really good at doing X task. There's a person who would really need your help to get organized and complete these tasks. Do you think you could help them? So I just weave it in as part of what we do. So, and by the way, that person's never told me that they've got dyscalculia. I'm just guessing, and I could be completely wrong. That maybe they've got a vision issue, which I have. So, I need reading glasses. But I hope that helps.
It does, thank you.
I actually want to. So, just as an employer, right, of almost 50 staff, I would say ask the question, but don't ask it the way I think that you're thinking, right? So, just in general, I think that our practice at AMS is, what can I do as your manager to help you do your job better, or to assist you in whatever, right? Whether that be training or resources or accommodations, or, you wouldn't say that, but just,
Right.
What can I do to help you do your job better? And I think that's a fair question, and that leaves it open. And then if they want to disclose, they can, or they could just describe maybe the accommodations or assistance that they might need, and then that helps you,
So as a leader, one of the things I learned early on in my career was to create a space where people saw my vulnerabilities and made it easy for them to share theirs. So even in the interview process, I'll tell them that, I'm lousy at math. I just stink at it. I need somebody who can help me manage my budgets. Are you that person? And then it opens up, oh yeah, and I'm terrible at writing. Oh good, well that's my strength. So it just opens up the conversation. I hope that helps.
Thank you. Any other questions?
So you've talked about starting small in order to work towards success. I'm curious if there's any examples about what has been the downfall of something that might have been going well or started out on the right foot, but ultimately it crumbled for whatever reason. How can we avoid some of those types of obstacles?
I have a perfect antidote for you. So Sampi, this was before I started there. They had a Women in Sampi luncheon, and their intention was beautiful. They wanted to support women in this industry and give them a space to come together and talk about the challenges that women have in aerospace and defense and government and so forth. And the challenge that I saw was, well, there's other genders. Where are they at this luncheon? And what does that mean as we evolve? And so when this committee was formed, I asked that question because we had our conference coming up, and the challenge, because we had mixed genders going on in the committee, they said, well, you know, we can keep it as women in Sanpete, or we can open it up to just anybody can come and talk about what does it mean to be in this industry that was so male dominated for so long, and how do we help others that are not white men or whatever, you know, general statement you want to make about the industry. How do we make it better? How do we bring in that diversity? And suddenly we had a luncheon that was just jam-packed, and it was all people who were highly interested in learning how to just be better at bringing to the table the people that had challenges in being part of an industry that wasn't always very welcoming. So it was beautiful to see, actually. I hope that answers your question.
Any other questions?
Hi, it's really important to our organization to have DEI be. We have our fourth vice president, who's now the chair of that, and we've created a women's caucus, diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging caucus. We're lawyers, new lawyers, and we fought for 20 plus years to have everyone have a seat at the table. Now we have all of those groups wanting their own things again. How do you deal with that?
Does anyone have?
I'll ask a clarifying question. So when you say wanting their own groups, you mean you've expanded your diversity in the organization, but some of those individuals now feel they want things specific to their groups. I'm more than happy to speak.
I do have one.
Yeah.
So our groups are, we have different organizations within us, and so we have young professionals, and to speak to a certain group that wants to remain young professionals, 35 and under, and we are very strict about that. So we have networking events and things at our events. Just for this group, we'll bring in mentors to help that are older than that 35, but they want that because they want to talk about the challenges they have being young. And the reason being that there's ageism, right? I have one of my young professional committee members is a PhD. She's younger than 35. Her boss is constantly talking to her like she's a child. So she wants to hear from others in her age group, how do I fix this? And having somebody who's 60 years old isn't going to probably provide what she's looking for. So we continued with this group, and it's been very healthy. It's one of our biggest growing, groups that we have at our events, and they love it.
No, I'd add on to that and say, because I know that is a huge area, is how do you accommodate for those who may not have traditionally had the space to be accommodated, but how do you not alienate anyone else? And in balancing that, I think there is strength, and I think there is empowerment in being around a group of your peers, people you identify with. Whether for me, whether that's being a mother, an engineer, an entrepreneur, a businesswoman or runner, or being black and female, and I think that's okay. I think where the harmony, and I won't say balance because it's never usually equal, where the harmony comes in is leaving those opportunities of integration and exchange. You don't want the groups to be isolated in who they are and what they do, but you do want them to feel empowered in being able to have some of that structure. And I think with each organization, in each group, it's gonna vary and it's gonna be different, but being mindful of that, I do think it is possible to have groups, different dynamics. You see it all the time where there are different subsets of groups, but there has to be intentionality in making sure those groups together stay connected.
I was just gonna add to that, we have our ERGs, and I think we started with 4 or 5 of them, and then have started slowly adding on. But even in our People of Possibilities ERG, which is for people with disabilities and their allies. Like my administrative assistant would like to start like a deaf ERG, with, even if we only have a few people in the company, so that they can teach about deaf culture, because, you know, it's so different from, I guess, you know, the culture of intellectual disabilities. But right now we don't have that. So I encouraged him to just, there isn't a specific ERG, but to still gather, you know, find time. There's nothing preventing you from doing that. Another thing that I've talked to my leadership team is that, you know, all of the folks that report directly to me, 7 out of the 8 of them are white. And what I said to them was, you know, I would like to encourage you to join an ERG as an ally and sit and learn from others. So find a ERG that you don't identify with necessarily as part of that group, and sit and listen and start thinking about, what do you want people to know about people like you? Because then when you form your ERG, you'll learn, you know, kind of the things that we're talking about. So just as a learning experience for them.
Excellent, thank you. So with that, I'm gonna have one final question for our panelists. And it's kind of a two-pronged question. I want you to think about your experience in your journey, either personally or with your organizations. And I want you to think of one of the most impactful lessons learned or successes. And then I want you to have a quick call to action for our audience today.
I'm the first, oh boy. So my journey, when I was telling my anecdote about, you know, being in the military, I saw personally a lot of the evolution of women in combat, and how that opened up a lot of doors to careers in the military for women that weren't there before. And part of the benefits and the value of all of that was just the lines of communication women have is far different than other genders sometimes, and how they work with people who could be seen either as an enemy or as an ally. And so some of my colleagues who were in Afghanistan were women who just were talking to other women, which culturally wasn't allowed for men to talk to Afghani women. So there was a communication benefit to being a woman, which was very interesting, and really helped further our cause in a lot of ways, which was really fantastic. But that journey has been amazing to see over the years. I just regret that it took this long. You know, it's been a solid 20 years and there's still a lot of challenges to be had in the military. So part of why I'm with SAMBI and with the DEI committee for Calais AE is because as a veteran, I think we have a responsibility to that call to action to really address the challenges that our active duty military have now, and also the veterans, and what does it mean to be a veteran. And so part of what I kind of challenge people with is a veteran is a veteran is a veteran. It doesn't matter if you're a woman, you're a combat veteran, a non-combat veteran, an overseas war veteran, you're a veteran. You wrote that same check as anybody else that signed up, went to basic training, did the whole swearing in ceremony, all of it. And you should get the same benefits. And that's been my call to action. And so I just hope that for you, the call to action for whatever you feel strongly about is the same. Get involved, just get out there and have those conversations with the people that can help make a difference. And usually, in my case, it's politicians, and I start locally, and I work with my city to engage more veterans with some of the police and fire departments and that sort of thing. So that's been my personal cause and call to action.
Impactful, most impactful. I think for me, it has been just realizing that DEIB is not any one thing. It's so many different flavors and you know, that really it's just about being open and sensitive to others and not making assumptions and kind of just, I mean, in my mind, just being a good human, you know. So I would say that my call to action would be, you know, when you meet somebody for the first time, or as you're getting to know somebody, just be open. You don't know, and I liked what Jennifer said earlier about, the visual, it's not visible if there is a challenge, if it's not visible. So to be open and just think, to just get to know the person and understand what their accommodations might be, and to try and provide that so that whoever that person is, that they can participate in your organization, as much as they want to and as they can. So that would be my call to action.
I think probably the biggest lesson I've learned in being in the role that I have the past year, 14 months, is that there's systemic change that's needed, and sometimes, all the time, for me, change is slower than I would like. So I have to work a lot more strategically, and I have to find allies and partners when I'm trying to get things changed. It's a tough one for me, because most of my experience has been in a corporate environment where if you're responsible for one thing, you've got an executive sponsor, you've got the resources, boom, you're going through and it's gonna happen. That doesn't happen necessarily with disability employment, where you're trying to influence member associations or employers or communities to include people with disabilities where there hasn't been a lot of inclusion before. So just that learning of really being strategic and putting my own sometimes personal need to push ahead and barrel through, it's not always the most effective, nor will it be sustainable if I do it that way. So that's a big lesson. And I always explain why, and it matters why, but it doesn't, right? I always tell people, look, I've got a 24-year-old son, and one of these days I'm gonna be dead, right? And I want the world to be a better place for him. That's my motivation. So whatever life I've got left, this is what I'm doing. I need the world to be more accepting of people like him. So I think that helps, but still, I've got to look at policy. I've got to look at where a company's goals are. I've got to look at what people are ready for, and not give it to them all at once. Big lesson. I would say call to action is really consider people with disabilities as people that you would hire, include in your friend groups, include in your communities, and the same principles that you use when including people who are different. It really transcends to all different types. It's got to be intentional. So my call to action is, look at your friend group, look at your company, and see who's missing. Who's missing? Who's not there? And then just start with one, okay? There's no X type of person in my group. I'm gonna start with that and see if I can find a way to attract them to come in. And I think if we just all do that, just one person, just one group, the world would be a better place. And then we're on our way to getting that second person, right? So.
Thank you, ladies. This has been great. I think just as our final notes as we wrap up in closing, just like you said, diversity is diverse. There's no one way to define that, and understanding that and realizing that, I think is a big step in the right direction. I would also say that you gain value when you acknowledge, respect, and leverage those differences. Differences aren't meant to be feared. They're meant to be embraced and understood, and they're there to add value, and you can tap into that. For me personally, one of my big focuses, DEIB is a 4-letter acronym, so diversity is just the start. So you want to think about when you bring more diverse folks into your space, how are you being equitable? How are you including them? How are you creating an environment that they feel like that environment was meant for them to be an active participant in? And that's where we start to get that E, I, and B into play. It's part of a full circle process there. Moving with intention and being well-intended is the first start, and being mindful as well. As these ladies have shared throughout, it's been a theme throughout all of their responses and experiences. So one final note, belonging is very seldom just the result or dependent upon the individual. It's often the system and space that that individual is showing up in that is the larger contributor. So with that being said, thank you for your time today. We appreciate you. We hope this was valuable and you have some takeaways. We do have a QR code, and so if I can't get it up here, we'll make sure, actually I believe it's here. Let me look real quick. I think we can get it up. Boom, go ahead, use that. It'll take you to a list of some resources that these women have put together for the group and for us, and I believe it also includes Cal SAE's new diversity landing page as well. So we thank you, we appreciate you. Have a good rest of the day, and feel free to come up and talk to us if you like. Thank you. Round of applause for the ladies here.